Hello plant lovers, it's Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you back to my channel, Hello Plant Lovers, where I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne without greenhouses or humidifiers or grow lights. They're either growing indoors or outdoors or they're out of the pool. So if that strikes chord with you, do hit subscribe. I post once a week and you can follow my very amateurish continuing adventures. And this week, am I happy or am I happy? This is a first for me. This, plant lovers, is a Coelogyne. And the thing is, when I began my kind of orchid journey, which is not that long ago in terms of really trying to learn more about them and knowing what I could grow here in Melbourne, which is why I started this channel, because I found it quite hard to find the information. I was watching the wonderful Rachel in Ireland in Gardening in Douentza, who has many orchids and includes many orchid videos in her channel, as well as other gardening ones. But Rachel had a lot of Coelogynes, and firstly, I loved the way she pronounced it, but secondly, adored the flowers, and thirdly, realized that they were a cool intermediate grower that I could possibly grow them here in Melbourne. So in fact, it was one of the first orchid types that I actually bought. I have read though that they are a little temperamental about being repotted, and as you know, plant lovers, I always repot things the minute that I get them in terracotta because I'm a terracotta pot kind of guy. And so the two Coelogynes I bought, which would be well over a year ago now, kind of just didn't do anything. They sort of sulked. But this season, ta-da, this one, the spike, as you can see, is beautifully open. And the other one has two spikes. In fact, I think maybe three spikes emerging. So probably in a month or two, we'll get some blooms from that. But firstly, let's look at this one. And it is, and I only know this because the flowers have now opened, it is Coelogyne flaccida. I don't think you can really see that name. Anyway, flaccida. Or is it flaccida? You tell me, I'm sure. The reason I don't know is that this orchid actually arrived with a dendrobium tag. Clearly, it was not a dendrobium. I'd ordered Coelogyne, but hadn't got a copy of the order of what I ordered, so I completely forgotten what it was. Anyway, I was able to find out when it bloomed. And I think this is such a silly thing to say, but the orchid blooms are very orchidy. Does that make sense? You know, like Cymbidium orchid flowers look very orchidy, as do actually Phalaenopsis. We happen to have one here that this is a store-bought Phalaenopsis that is stunning colour, and it's just here for whatever. I can't resist, particularly a great colour store-bought Phalaenopsis, which incidentally has just developed another spike, but that's a whole nother story. So I love the form of these flowers. So Coelogynes are largely Himalayan natives, but they do stretch all the way to Fiji apparently. And a lot of them are high altitude. So this particular one, flaccida or flaccida, I should have looked it up to pronounce it properly, but forgive me, I am not a Latin scholar nor a botanist. This one is native to that Himalayan area which stretches across India, Nepal, Bhutan, into Myanmar and Laos, over in that direction. Relatively high altitudes and quite misty forests. So that is a thing about Coelogynes. They do like their humidity, and Melbourne has fairly reasonable average humidity. It's sort of 50 to 60%, give or take, depending on summer or winter. But these guys do like it humid, as opposed to Marilyn Monroe, who liked it hot. This particular one was named by a guy called John Lindley in 1830, so quite early in the orchid naming adventure, and it is a beauty. Okay, so Coelogyne basic care. Firstly, always good to know where they come from. High altitude, damp, misty forests. So the thing I do with this is I give it a good spray as often as I can remember, which I try to do every morning. This one lives outside all year, so it's undercover, protected from the rain, but it does get those quite cool in Melbourne winter nighttime minimum temperatures. And in Melbourne, it can get down, and it has got down the last few winters, to 1-2 degrees Celsius, which is 33, 34, 35, 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Not freezing, but cold. The thing is, of course, in that kind of condition, to make sure it's not wet. Wet and cold can kill an orchid. But this one does like actually quite dryish winters. It is pretty well equipped to survive our winters. Light, first of all, brightish indirect light, not too strong, perhaps not as strong as Oncidium's, slightly down on the scale. Mine does get very early, light, dappled morning direct sun, but it's very gentle, and then it gets medium moderate shade for the rest of the day. Watering in summer a lot more, in winter a lot less. So it does need a dry-ish winter. Not completely dry, but I do let the medium dry out quite a bit. And as I mentioned, cool plus wet equals death. So watering it in winter, try and water it in the morning of a sunny, windy day rather than a cold, damp, miserable day. In its native range, it is an epiphyte, sometimes a lithophyte. I love a lithophyte, which means, as with most orchids, it needs a free draining mix. And for me, that means medium-sized bark with a bit of charcoal and a bit of perlite, a little bit of sphagnum moss chopped up within that, a tiny bit of shell grit for calcium, and mycorrhizal fungi to promote healthy root growth. Fertilizer-wise, I put a few grains of slow-release fertilizer in the mix whenever I repot it, and every spring a little topical application of that, and that is literally 2 to 3 grains of a generic slow-release fertilizer. And then during the season, particularly during the growth season, so that's the warmer time of the year, I will give it a diluted liquid orchid feed, which can be a seaweed-based solution or an orchid-centric liquid food, and I tend to dilute it about 1/8 of the amount that's recommended on the bottle. Otherwise, this is really just sat in its corner doing its thing. As I said, it's sort of on the shadier side of the spectrum. They don't like bright light. I wouldn't be giving it any direct sunlight apart from perhaps very early in the morning with gentle light. If you imagine it's growing up in forests, clinging to trees or rocky outcrops, it's going to be protected by a lot of canopy of wafting leaves. So imagine that's the type of environment you're trying to create for it. The flowers, they have a fragrance. It's slightly daffodilish. This particular one, not particularly strong. You'd really have to get your nose into it. So perhaps not one to grow for its fragrance, but look at that flower. Isn't it just sensational? Now, this was a division, and you can see from the pseudobulbs there that I had a couple of nice mature ones, and the flower spike has come out of the most recent pseudobulb. So as with most orchids, vegetative growth, name of the game, more growth equals more flowers. Now, because mine hasn't flowered multiply, this is the first time it's bloomed, I am not sure if it can rebloom from an existing pseudobulb. We shall see. I probably doubt it, but you never know. Perhaps one of you will know and leave a message below. I have also read that they dislike disturbance, so I should be leaving it in this pot for quite some time. They kind of have a bit of a creeping habit, and I've seen specimen examples which have really sort of engulfed the pot. So I'm not that concerned about it engulfing this pot. We'll see how it goes, but maybe in 2 or 3 years' time we might have to revisit its potting situation. But there we are, plant lovers. Coelogyne flaccida, flaccida. Either way, whichever way you pronounce the I, I'm very pleased. This is the first Coelogyne I've had to bloom. I think I may have got a bit hooked now because they seem to like my conditions, and the flowers are stunning, and there's quite a few available in Australia, so I am going to definitely be investigating this type a little bit more. But thank you for watching, plant lovers. I hope this has been interesting. I post every week, so do hit subscribe if you want to hear more of my amateur and continuing journeys on the orchid path of life, and I look forward to seeing you next week with something else.